I want to begin with the place where perhaps we agree, which is that we all understand the need to have circularity of plastic. We all understand the need to protect the environment and protect the oceans in particular from the consequences of plastic pollution. I think there is disagreement about how we achieve that objective, but that's certainly something that we're agreed upon. So we're going to get into this subject straight away with Carolina. Carolina, I just want to start, just if you can set the scene for us. One of the issues that we have with plastic is obviously that the rate of recycling is very low. So we're going to get into the technical details in a moment. So you will explain to us what mass balance is. We've got a bit of preparation on that, but we'll talk about that in more detail. But firstly, just a very simple question of why exactly is it that the rate of recycling is so low?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned, thank you for the question, because we need to face the reality that we are living, right? The recycling rate, the latest official data for plastics in Europe is only 32%. The percentage of recycled plastics used in plastic packaging is only 4%. That's what we have.
Yeah.
And it's better than in the rest of the world, but we cannot be compliant because the rest of the world is even worse. The global recycling rate in the world of plastics is only 9%. And the recycled use rate in plastics packaging is almost 0. So this is what we have. And basically there are two reasons why we should change what we have. The first reason is we cannot afford to keep on losing resources for circularity, because it's crucial that we use those resources instead of fossil resources. And why is crucial? Because then the industry, plastics and chemicals industry, will be able to defossilize, use less fossil resources to reach net zero. Circularity is a key lever for our industry, plastics and chemicals industry, to reach net zero. We need it. And we need all the recycling technologies to play a role. Why all? Because we need to recycle more, and we need to recycle, better, in a sense, right? To be able to get that path forward ahead, right? If we want to really reach a clear economy of circularity at the scale effective, we need to reach higher levels that we have today. And those are the levels that we are discussing. And it's really good to have bold ambitions, because if we have little ambitions, we will not change the needle. That's why we like those bold ambitions that policy is proposing, right? This 55% by 2030 ambition and those bold targets for recycled plastics using plastics packaging.
Carolina, thank you. There's a little bit more scene setting that I think we need to do, because there are some quite technical aspects to this conversation. So firstly, just tell us a little bit about what exactly mass balance is. I know that some of you in the room will know and understand mass balance in your industries, and it applies across a number of industries. But how does the mass balance system work for plastics recycling?
Yes, and that's basically when we explain that, I mean, and probably all of you have your own responses, right? But I find myself difficult to try to explain this synthetically. And and because it's not easy to explain, it's not well understood. Everybody in general in this moment in Europe, because we have been discussing this for a while, has already an opinion. Yes, mass balance, we know. I mean, when you deep dive in, so how it's working, what are the different allocations options that I have on the table, what does this mean each scheme, few people is able to respond. And we all need to be able to respond. Because if we want to educate our policymakers and get the framework that we need to be able to respond to those questions. So in my simple terms, mass balance is the allocation method that is at the end a rule of the game that will enable to utilizing different type of feedstocks in a system, sustainable and fossil, to be able to attribute the sustainable inputs to the different outputs in a certain manner. That's my simple explanation. But then you have different models of mass balance, right? And I would be thinking who is really feeling comfortable? I just a question, open question for all of us. Who really is feeling comfortable today of explaining how those models are working? Probably not so many of us, right? Because it's complex to explain those models, right? And we can enter into details, and we will. But just want to leave it here, because also I think it's a self-reflection on how are we able to explain those models to others. Because we need now to well articulated explanation to the others on how its model, I would say, work, and what are the consequences and impacts of following its model, because there are really, really different consequences of following each of them.
Okay, and I just want to stay on mass balance for a minute with you, Carolina, because obviously we know that it applies across other sectors and it's used to drive sustainability in other sectors, amongst agricultural commodities, for example. But could you just give us, just unpick a little bit further how you see it working in plastics? So what exactly is the system that you think we should be using to raise recycling rates?
Okay, first of all, it needs to be a system that is enable a scale. We need a scale because, as I say, we all know that the challenge is massive. And to solve a massive challenge, we cannot go with little solutions. We need to go with a solution scalable, first of all. Second, we fully endorse and we fully support that the outputs that are burned, so are ending in fuels, products that are sold, we should not be counting them as recycling. So that's why that's clear. From the legal perspective and from the, our own believing perspective, outputs that are ending in materials, and I'm saying materials because I want to say in materials means plastics and chemicals. We need a circular economy for plastics, but we need a circular economy for all materials, chemicals as well, because chemicals is basically paints, lubricants, adhesives, everything that we use in our daily lives. So they need as well to get circularity. And that's why on that matter, we are supporting the model which is called fuel use exempt. All outputs are counted, excluding fuels. You have other options on the table, which are proportional allocation and polymers only, which are restricting the way you can allocate the sustainable credits in the system coming from recycled feedstocks into the outputs. So polymers only enables you to freely allocate the sustainable inputs into only the polymers part of the outputs. And proportional allocation is just restricting more and saying you can only allocate those credits within a certain given specific product. The more restricted method that you apply, with the same, this is very important, sustainable feedstocks you are putting in the system, we are not changing anything. We're just changing the rules of accounting, okay? The same input is coming, the same output is going. But with the more restricted methods, you have artificially a lower yield in the system, so you have artificially a higher cost in the system, and you have artificially more burdens in terms of business impacts, economics, and environmental impacts, because you will need to artificially to get the same thing, create a much more bigger system, which is not needed. That's my more simple explanation to this matter.
That's very clear.
I don't know how much simple I was, but I mean, open for others.
That's great, and we'll reinforce and go deeper into this in the next few minutes. So essentially, there are more and less flexible ways of accounting for the plastic that is going through this chain. I want to bring Lauriane in a moment on this point and ask for your view. But first, Caroline, you're with Mars, but also here for the Flexible Packaging Initiative. So you're someone who's a sort of consumer of Dow's products, or a consumer maybe one step removed, I think, from Dow's products. What's your view of, firstly, just in broad terms, what's your view of the plastic recycling problem and how we can raise the plastic recycling rate, and then we'll come into this question of mass balance and where you stand on it.
Okay.
But first, in general terms, how do we deal with this problem?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe actually I will start by introducing the Flexible Packaging Initiative for those of you who don't know it, because that will explain as well where we come from. So we're actually an initiative who group 6 companies, FMCG companies. So Ferrero, Mars, Mondelez, Nestlé, PepsiCo, and Unilever. Actually, a few of my colleagues are here in the room as well if anything needs to be completed from what I say. And we joined forces because in our portfolio of packaging, we use a lot of flexible plastic packaging. So you think about pouches, for Mars, chocolate pouches, pet food, if you've got a cat or a dog, dry cables usually go in this kind of plastic packaging as well. And we use them because they're really good, from a performance criteria standpoint. So they protect your product, you've got long shelf life, you can keep them for like a long time at home or in supermarkets. And they also have a relatively lower carbon footprint compared to other alternatives. So overall, in a circular economy where net zero as well will matter, that's why we think they have a role to play. Now, why we grouped as companies is because they're not, and back to your question, they are not recyclable at scale today. Yeah. And they are not, more importantly for us, recyclable within our own packaging. So we group forces because...
and just to explain, what is the reason that they are not recyclable for your packaging?
Okay, sure. And actually that will link as well to mass balance indirectly. So because our packaging are in food contact, they require some hygiene criteria that through mechanical recycling, unfortunately, today we can't get. So usually, and I mean, you're probably some of you here are even more familiar than me with the mechanical recycling process. But as an output, you might have something which might be a bit dirty still, which might smell with risk of chemical migration. So from a food safety standpoint, and it's not only me saying this, like EFSA has not approved yet, at least for flexible, the possibility to come back into a flexible packaging in food contact.
Yeah.
And so that's where other technologies come in place. Technologies that are called advanced recycling or chemical recycling. Yep. It's a family of new recycling possibilities which enable to basically break down the packaging that we have put as an input in the waste stream back into, if you think about it as a Lego packaging, back into the blocks, the initial blocks. Mm-hmm. And these initial blocks, they are of sufficient quality to come back into food contact. So that's where it matters for us that chemical recycling could scale in order to get this feedstock. Mm-hmm. Now, where mass balance come in place is because we know that mass balance, well, maybe if I take it this way, these blocks of Lego that I'm talking about, it's absolutely impossible to distinguish them from crude oil that we would get from the ground. Yeah. And they get mixed together to reform a new packaging. Yep. So it's not possible to say, well, I know how much I've put as an input in my factory to form my new packaging, but I can't tell you, oh, it's exactly in this specific packaging that my recycled content sit. Yep. And so because I can't physically trace, I need mass balance to do as an allocation method to tell, okay, well, as you said, it's accounting. To say, well, I know that I've got as much at the beginning that at the end of my chain, but I allocate it in a certain way, making sure as also through third-party certification, that's something super important for us, that there is credibility on the process, that no one can say I've got 5 tons at the beginning and 7 at the end, so it's 5 and 5. This is super important, but because you can't trace physically, you can't take a packaging and say, oh, this one contains recycled content. Mm-hmm. That's where mass balance comes into place. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of jargon in this conversation, I guess. Fuel exempt mass balance is not a phrase that we use every day, any of us, if we're normal people. But I think the central question is a question of trust, right? So the question is one, can we trust that this product is what it says it is? If this product says it contains recycled plastic, do we have trust in that claim? So that's, I think, what we're in a way, what we are discussing here, in using slightly more complicated language. Lauriane, I want to ask you, what's your view of what you heard so far? And also, Carolina and Carolina both talked about fuel-exempt mass balance and the advantages of fuel-exempt mass balance for scaling, but there are other kinds of mass balance. So perhaps you would also give us a sense of what other kinds of mass balance there are.
Yes, so Carolina already mentioned the proportional allocation and the polymers only. Yeah. So perhaps also explain a bit who we are and who I'm representing. So I'm working for an NGO, Zero Waste Europe. So we are Brussels-based, and we are working mostly on waste, municipal waste, from different perspectives, policy side, but also implementation sides, different person of the team. And the idea really is we have this problem of municipal waste. So how can we handle it to really reduce the waste in municipal waste? So what you are always coming from, it's following the waste hierarchy, so always preventing waste to come. So through reducing the use, for example, of packaging, then afterwards reusing it. And from that perspective, there is also really an important point to know is that by scaling up reuse, we will also increase the recycling targets at the member state level. So this is also not only like improving recycling that will help for recycling targets. If we improve reuse, we will have less, let's say, product on the market. So if I'm reducing, then automatically I will increase my recycling targets. So there's also this other entrance that can help us achieve the recycling targets. And this is really a point that is also important for us. It's
critically important, and I want to come to it in a moment, but maybe just first to focus on the recycling question.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And
it's a really important point to make, thank you.
And so after, when it comes to like the allocation we are asking for, what we are asking for is to have a proportional allocation. Right. So proportional allocation from our perspective and also what we understand from the situation is that all the recycled inputs that we have, the feedstock, is going everywhere in the production.
Yes.
So this proportional allocation is just that if I'm having 10 units as an input, my 10 units are spread everywhere in the production.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, we reflect, let's say, all the inputs, recycled inputs is going everywhere in the different phase of the.
So if I buy my Mars bar, I know that there is X% of recycled content in that Mars bar packaging.
Yeah, that's the idea. And so from that perspective, when it comes to also like using recycled content and the claim we can make, from that perspective, as consumers as well, it's also being a lot of discussion with consumer representative organization, is that when as a consumer, I'm buying something that is made of recycled content or that is made with like fair trade chocolates, what I'm thinking is that I'm buying this and this is really in the product I'm buying. Yeah. So that's really also from our perspective where we comes from. Like when it comes, for example, we see a lot of shampoo bottles, for example, these days. Like my flatmate has one and like, let's say professional behavior, I just look at the claims made on it. It was like 100% recycled content. I was like, well, I think like from what I know, this is not possible to have this 100% recycled content. Yes. So what I'm asking is also to have transparency. If I'm having a claim on the product, I would assume
I find that as soon as you begin to work in the environmental area, you're a very bad person to have around the house because you're looking at all the labels.
So this kind of thing, and so I'm like, well, I'm having this product, so as a consumer, I think that I have the right to that. What is claimed to me is really inside the product. And this is from where we come from that perspective.
Caroline, do you want to come back on this question? Because what Lauriane says is a good point. From the customer trust point of view, it is perhaps important for the customers to feel that, yes, there is a certain amount of recycled plastic and I know how much there is. So, but your argument is that you can still build trust through an alternative approach, right?
So, no, where we come from is to think, well, if there is a mass balance method which is recognized and agreed by the legislation, then it's leveling the playing field by sense, so that every company does the same, like follows the same rules. You could as well, it's actually something we're asking for, that as part of the packaging and packaging waste regulation, which is getting discussed, which proposed to have like a voluntary label with the percentage of recycled content, if it enables as well to do a framework for claiming recycled content coming from chemical recycling, then the rules would be the same. So actually, what we're asking for is, because credibility is super important from our perspective as well, I think on this we can agree. We absolutely, well, we're especially Mars, we're a family-owned company, so it's very important for the family whenever we make claims, of course. But I can speak on behalf of the other FPI brands there as well. So what we ask for is that if mass balance is recognized by law, then we all know which kind of mass balance we're speaking about. We can communicate this to the consumer. So typically on a packaging, you could have, I don't know, a QR code or a link to a website so that the consumer can access. And of course, we'll need to work, with our communication team on how we bring that in an accessible way, because we all know how complex the topic is. But definitely, like, that's the intent, and that's why we need this in the legislation, in a sense.
Okay. Lauriane, I want to come back to you to ask, what is the framework, or what are the benchmarks that we need to set, do you think, for a mass balance system to be reliable?
So, like, from my perspective, and also when it comes to claims, so the framework is that we can make robust claims, also really transparent, and have a strong traceability along the value chains. So from that perspective, like, if we're not having a mass balance that is based on proportional allocation, and that is based on batch level, then what we would say is that you are not able to make any claim at the product level, because you can't say, in this product, I'm having this. So then what you will be saying to the consumer is not these specific items, is that as a company, and this also as a consumer, we need to understand that not everything is recyclable and is really circular. I mean, if we speak about, for example, like, I don't know, plastic, because it's the subject of the conversation today, like the circularity of plastic is less important than for glass, for example. So, like, also because glass, the recyclability and the recycling rate is much higher. I mean, it's another subject, but also to really showing the circularity of different materials. We need also to just, as a consumer, understand what also plastic is. I mean, I arrived in the subject thinking like plastic, just one specific word. When you dig into this subject, you're like, okay, that's another word, different type of plastic, different application. So also that from that perspective, there is a lot of education, and I don't think that putting claims that are really trustable and transparent to consumer will help them understand all the challenges that we are facing when it comes to like recycling plastic and making it circular from that perspective.
Carolina, do you want to come back on this point and the comments that Lorena has just made about traceability and trust?
Yes, first of all, I think we all agree that trust is crucial. And that's why, I mean, nobody can deny that, right? So I think, we are fully as well supporting, a credible third-party system. We have seen in the brewery today an example. There are 35 red cup. If you cannot say, I mean, I'm doing my self-assessment, what I'm doing is this. No. We need to have a law, as Caroline, you were saying. We need to have a framework, legal framework that is stipulating what are the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are equal for everybody, as you say, to ensure a fair level playing field for all recycling technologies. So we can, when we are making a claim based on those rules, the consumer, coming back to your point, understands what is behind. And the consumers are not chemical engineers, right? They are consumers. So we need to make simple legal claims about recycled content. In our view, different claims unpack if the content is coming from physical segregated processes that they don't use mass balance versus the one that using mass balance. I think we need to have different claims. But that's my point of trust and credibility. And if the rules of the games are the same, can work.
There is a risk that this becomes quite confusing.
Exactly. I mean, for me, it's also finding the balance. And Caroline, you're working as a brand, finding the balance between credibility, transparency, and simplicity. Because you cannot do an on-pan claim for an average consumer, which is super technical, nobody get it. But I mean, at least needs to be differentiated physical segregation and mass balance in wording. And then you can have a link, QR code to explain that. But it needs to be a legal framework defining the rules of the game. That's how we can think, because clearly third-party certification scheme is crucial. And coming back maybe to your point, Caroline, and I know we think differently here, right? But I think, mass balance at the end, again, the important part is the quantity that is entering is the same quantity that is exiting, right? And even if you do proportional allocation, you cannot ensure, even if you do proportional allocation, you cannot ensure that the content you are claiming is there. This is the essence of mass balance, because everything is blend and the chemical molecules cannot be distinguished, as Caroline was saying. So basically, this is, even going that way is not solving, I understand your concerns. That's what we need, those rules of the game with third-party certification. What is going to be solving your concerns is that rules of the game equal for everybody. Now, proportional allocation is putting a hard stop into the business financials, and it will put a hard stop into scaling up circularity of plastic, because make the business case impossible.
Just explain that last point, Carolina. What is the business challenge of proportional allocation?
Because
it is reducing the amount of freedom that you have to use the end product?
Yes, but I don't want to use the word freedom. For me, it's much more...
flexibility?
It's reducing so much the flexibility. And again, we are putting the same in the system. It's just not putting less in the system. We want to recycle more plastics, period. Now, if the accounting rules are very, very strict, you get artificially very low yields. And then you get artificially very high costs. And then you put in a system in a point that the market will not be ready to pay for those products. And then you stop circularity of plastics before scaling it up. So you are breaking the business incentive to do things better. And we need to do things better.
Okay, I want to bring the audience in a moment, but before we do that, I just want to explain, or maybe ask you to explain something that we've touched on in this conversation, but haven't fully unpacked, and that is the different kinds of recycling. I know some people in the audience will already know, but maybe not everyone. We talked about advanced recycling and mechanical recycling, or chemical recycling and mechanical recycling. Just tell us what is the difference between those two kinds of recycling.
Okay, I will very simplicity, and then I will invite Antonino to give the definition of mechanical recycling maybe. But for me, simplicity will be mechanical recycling is those recycling processes which are using physical processes that are not changing the chemical composition of the plastic per se. So there are cutting, shredding, okay, and transform it. So the plastic input is a waste and gets a final product, which is a recyclate, okay? The chemical recycling
a final
process,
product, which is a
recyclate, but the case of being a plastic equally, but it's cut, it's shredded, transforming, but just the same essence.
Yes.
And the chemical recycling processes are the ones that are transforming the chemical architecture of the waste. So the molecules are chemically reacting and forming other new molecules and substances. That's kind of my basic explanation of the difference.
Okay, and the advantage, Caroline, you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, the advantage for you of chemical recycling is that it produces products that you can then reuse. Do I understand that correctly? In food contact.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but and one method has a higher energy footprint or a higher carbon footprint than the other. Lauriane, are you raising your hand because you want to come in?
Yes.
Do please come in. Yeah.
Yeah. So from that perspective, at Zero Waste Europe, we have another way also to differentiate between the different technologies, because what I notice also speaking with everyone, say, well, we do chemical recycling. I'm like, it's nice. There's so many types of technology. What are we really speaking about?
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, we also decided to try to reduce the blurry when it comes to these concepts, and also
reduce the what, sorry?
Like the concept of chemical recycling. And also from that perspective, what we always ask is just to always use chemical recycling and not advanced recycling, feedstock recycling, because
right. yeah.
So many things in the end.
Yeah.
So but when it comes to what is chemical recycling and what is not.
Yes.
So from our perspective, we make a differentiation.
Yeah.
Is that we have mechanical recycling that is not changing the chemical structure.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we have what we call chemical recycling. So we have our plastic, and it goes back to the monomer. So just before all the carbons are putting together, if I can say it simply.
Yes.
And then we have what we call chemical recovery technology that are going back at the carbon molecular level. So from us, there is a differentiation also based on the environmental impact. And this is also have been recognized by the EU legislation, because if we speak about a regulation on recycled plastic for food contact material, the outcome of pyrolysis is not part of this. It's not recognized as recycled plastic. It's recognized as, let's say, plastic of like the virgin plastic, let's say, but not as recycled. So it's much more recovering from that perspective, also the molecular. That's why we are also using this to make a differentiation at the same time from that perspective.
And chemical recycling, if I can use your phrase for a minute, that has a higher energy footprint or a higher carbon footprint than mechanical recycling, or not necessarily?
From that perspective, it has a higher. Yeah. And also, we have mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and then chemical recovery, and then afterwards, incineration and landfill. But it's, let's say, burning waste that doesn't has a place in a circular economy.
Okay. Antonio, your name was taken in vain earlier by Carolina. Did you want to tell us who you are? Perhaps not everyone knows who you are, and then also maybe respond to some of what you've heard so far.
Yes. I'm Antonio Furfrey from Plastic Recyclers Europe. I only have one definition of recycling, and it's the one of the Waste Framework Directive. So all the rest, we can discuss hours and hours on how to calculate, but the legislation just has one definition.
Yes,
and with that one definition, we need to make sure that we have one calculation method to be applied to everyone. And at the end, the claims we're going to make to the consumers have to be very simple.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure the consumer will understand why we say 92% versus 95% recycled content. Yes. It doesn't make any sense. So we really have to be very simple in the way we are communicating to the consumer, having one method easily applicable to all technologies, and then we can advance to make plastic more circular and really work on installing the capacities and go away of this debate on mass balance and all the rest, because it's good to have for the legislator. We need to advance, but at the end of the day, again, we need clarity. And that clarity will bring the trust from the consumer to buy products we have recycled content, and finally change this nice image plastic has.
What is your view of the problem of why the rate of recycling is so low, and how we can address that?
How many hours do we have?
We have one.
Plastics, or at least the products which we put today on the market, were never thought to be recycling. Most of them,
right?
Beside the PET bottle. So today it's true that we have mechanical recycling, and when you blend all the products together, you have a quality which sometimes do not meet the requirement of the brands, the converters. So that's the problem number one. Number two is that we are not collecting all the plastics still today.
Yes, sir.
Number three, we are not sorting all the plastics. In many countries, you still only collect bottles, even though the technology to sort them automatically is there since 10 years or more. So if all the boxes are ticked, then I'm sure that we can go back with all technologies to full contact materials and have high percentage of recycled content.
Brilliant. Thanks, Antonio. You've led us exactly to the next two things I want to talk about. But before we go on with the panel, I'd love to hear some more from the room, if there's anyone else, the gentleman next to you, and then the lady on that side. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rob Vasagar. I'm representing the converters today. So I'm the president of the Dutch Brands Association. And I'm working with a big Dutch company. We have 10 production locations. One of the things that I'm really struggling with is that we need all materials. And therefore I do fully agree that we need a mass balance approach. However, we now know already, if I look at a steam cracker, if I change the feedstock, the yields will be different. And I get ethylene, or propylene, butadiene, industrial waxes, and they will change if you look at the scientific context. So therefore, there is a big debate from the recycling industry that say, well, hey, wait a minute. If I then allocate free allocation all the feedstock to ethylene, is that a fair comparison? Because some recycling industries, or member of our branch associations, are saying, well, you know, I can make waste refuse bags, put 100% recycled content in. If I do free allocation, I can basically sell new plastics with a free allocation certificate as well. So therefore, do we level the playing fields, or do we actually generate a next public relations issue if we go for free allocation? And that's my main worry. We have enough public relations issues already, and if we don't do this the right way, we might bump into even worse consumer perceptions.
If I
okay,
may,
let me just take the lady, and then we'll Karin, you can come back to Rob.
Because I want to reply to
Yes,
Rob.
of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Gloria Gabellini, PepsiCo. Just speaking a couple of things that have been said in the panel. Carolina said that your objective is to become carbon neutral in time, and that's our objective as well as brands. Many of our companies have the same objective, and that sometimes is also what makes us reflect. Of course, we want to do both mechanical recycling, and where not possible to do mechanical recycling, chemical recycling. Yeah. One of the issues is, of course, the energy profile of the technology, right? Which can, take us a bit backwards towards our route to climate neutrality. So that's one comment, and the other one, and linking it to what you said about the issue that you have with the different allocations and how consumer can trust it. But I wanted to ask you, what is the difference in terms of environmental impact of these different allocations, and is there a difference in the environmental impact if we allocate in one way or the other, the two that you explained?
Do you mean mass balance?
No, not mass balance, the proportional allocation and the
fuel exempt.
And the fuel exempt, yeah.
Okay.
And if there isn't, I would guess my sort of a plea would be, let's maybe partner up to ask this industry that we want to work together to help them also to become better in their processes so that it can use less energy. So we also benefit from that, right? So in essence, while I totally understand the consumer angle, which is critical for any brands, let's also work on let's sort of focus now on how to make the environmental profile of this technology as best as possible, and work together on that.
Thank you very much. Carolina, do you want to?
I think Oliver wants to speak.
Okay, great. Yes,
so let's
hear
go.
from Oliver.
I remember, so that's
yes.
fine.
Yes. Okay, great.
That's fine.
Sorry, I just want to add something, because you said there were maybe some quality issues, etc.
No, not quality. I don't have any worries about quality.
Okay. Because the way, so I work for Mura, so we're an advanced or chemical recycler. I'd like to use the word advanced in our case, because we're not pyrolysis. because chemical recycling seems to be synonymous with pyrolysis, and we have all the difficulty then with that because it doesn't apply to us. But just to be clear on how this works. So first of all, somebody like Dow comes to us and says, we are only going to buy anything from you, and we're going and nothing is going to go near our equipment that doesn't meet a certain specification. And the specification is very strict. Yeah, so let's be clear about that, because there's a reason why you sometimes have a lot of material going into fuels is that a lot of people and their processes and their companies cannot meet the strict specifications that the plastic manufacturers have for their cracker. The crackers are built in a certain way that they have a maximum efficiency to produce a certain product in a certain way, and if you cannot meet the input guidelines that cracker was designed for, you're not going to sell your output to them. And that way, the plastics or anything that comes out of that cracker has the same quality, I guess, parameters as it would be with fossil. So it is completely fungible. So I just want to say that. So that means the burden, essentially, to produce this quality, to allow this to happen, lies with people like us, right? So our company. So with the little guy who comes in and says, there's this big ask in the market, and we have to fulfill this. So really, at the end of the day, this whole mass balance discussion and so on is entirely an accounting question and not indexed to quality of products, what happens out the other end, etc. And this is why maybe you can elaborate on that just to help me, because I'm new to this line of argumentation, what the difference is between chemical recycling and chemical recovery, because for me, that distinction that's lost on me in terms of how I practice my business. I'd be grateful I'm not saying this facetiously, then educate me what this means. And I think that's the main point. I mean, we'll probably get to a lot of other points, so I don't want to sort of jump ahead and confuse the dialogue, but I just wanted to add my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. And I think, Jeff, were you signaling that you'd like to come in as well? Yeah,
thanks very much. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points being raised by participants today. So I'm a former regulator. I'm Jeff Brighty. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Mura Technology, and I'm a former regulator with the Environment Agency. So I'm a waste regulator, or have been. And I absolutely agree with you. I think a high-level definition of recycling is essential. I think the difference I would suggest is that when we're looking at particular material types is that they can go in different directions, but they can equally achieve end of waste. So in that sense, the comparison of plastic, mechanically recycled plastic, and advanced or chemically recycled plastic depends on whether you've achieved end of waste for what you have produced and where that then goes. So I think that's an important distinction to make, because currently we think there's conversations around they need to be treated exactly the same, and they shouldn't be, because the material types are very different. The comment from behind, which is about what's the environmental implications of what is chosen. Another job I've done has been running an NGO called Plastic Oceans, and I was involved with the very early stages of raising the plastic issue. So it's interesting, I find myself where I am now in Mura trying to deal with the solution to a problem. In my head, this is about maximising the supply of material that has been recycled back into the circular economy. The implications of not doing that mean that you have, other than the business case for investment, and Caroline has alluded to that, the implications are that some material that is very marginal, that is currently going to energy from waste, and therefore putting carbon dioxide into the environment, will continue at a pace. And so for me, it's about how do we scavenge as much material, collectively complementing existing waste management systems, enhancing them. I mean, I'd like to give more on a valorised plastic here. How do we do that so we're delivering the best outcome? So for me, it's about the mass balance accounting. For me, as a tool, for me, needs to make sure that we have fair claims on what is therefore going into products going through. But some of the conversation to me feels a bit like angels dancing on heads of pins. We have to get as much material back into that circular economy, not with outlandish claims, but with claims that are at least chemically plausible, to demonstrate that has gone into that product. So for me, it's about scale, investment, bringing this to bear, and dealing with the material that we know will never be recycled. This is the stuff that we're burning, and I think that's the compelling environmental argument for me.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Carolina, do you want to come back?
Yes, I would
Some of
like
these
to
points.
pass the word to Lorian because he wants, probably you want to respond to Oliver. No,
Yeah.
First of all, Antonino, fully agree. I think we are fully agree with your stuff, right? Everybody's agreeing on that. The legal definition of recycling is in the Waste Framework Directive. That's why outputs ending in fuels are not counting, should not be counting, and we are all agreeing with that, first of all. Yes, I mean, design for recyclability is crucial. That's why we are fully supporting, endorsing, calling for design for recyclability as a legal mandatory requirement, not only for plastics packaging, for all plastics articles. That would be ideal. Yeah. And innovation, we are driving material science innovation. Polymer innovations are crucial to make that happen. So we are completely on it. We have been working in R&D programs for the past 20 years, Dow and the industry, to enable that to happen. We want this legal framework. Maybe to Rob, thank you so much for coming. 2 points on what you said. First of all, changing the feedstocks, I mean, from fossil to circular, coming back to Oliver, does not mean changing the outputs or the use of the cracker. We have a spec, as Oliver said, and we will keep the spec. We try to broaden a bit the spec to make things switchable, so we try to kind of scale up, so we try to see how wide the limits of the crackers we can live, because we have been super strict, because we didn't need to do any innovation on that angle in the past 125 years. So we are ready to see, but see with a very limits. So in a point, the output and the yields of the cracker will not change, to your point. So we will keep on producing the same ratios of producing the cracker, independently of coming from fossil or circular feedstocks. That's clear. This was your comment. And as to Gloria, I think for us what is crucial, and probably Gloria, you can elaborate more because you mentioned something. For us, what it has been crucial is the GRC report released in March on the sustainability and economic environmental effectiveness of different recycling technologies. 35 recycling technologies have been scouted in Europe with industry data. Everybody here provides data. Okay, mechanical recycling processes, real processes, and chemical recycling processes, not only pyrolysis, depolymerization, and so far, so forth. The result is saying chemical recycling is better versus incineration. Mechanical recycling is the best. Yes, no doubt. In CO2, if you can mechanical recycle a plastic and you can use because you don't need food contact compliance, be my guest. And we need to scale up mechanical recycling. To reach 55% by 2030, guess what? We need everything. Yeah. Mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, all technologies coming to your point. So, and the other result, mechanical recycling is better, chemical recycling is better versus incineration. How much better? 0.0 kilos of CO2 per ton of plastic waste handled. This is data. Average processes in Europe.
How does it compare to putting it into landfill,
though? Landfill is based on anything in incineration versus landfill. It will be not CO2 savings, but let me say, because this is even worse, it's in the bottom of the pyramid because you're losing carbon for circularity. Yeah. So if you put the holistic, it's not in the GRC report, but you put the holistic view of, okay, fair enough, you don't get CO2 savings, you just lose it for circularity. You keep on drilling fossil resources. If you put the holistic view on drilling, it's not in the GRC report, but you put the boundaries of the sea even farther and upstream, it's worse landfilling. That's why we need the circular feedstocks. This is coming to your point, Gloria. And this report is very important because before we were using industry company data as suspicious because you are industry. No. This is the GRC report, and everybody can have a look, right? So that's my comment to you. And maybe now passing to Laura because you want to reply to Oliver, probably.
Yeah, so the main difference we make between what we call chemical recycling and chemical recovery is really much from like the environmental approach and also like the energy requirements, because comparing, let's say, chemical depolymerization through pyrolysis gasification, the one I know the most for now, is really like the energy requirement to run the process is completely different. So from that perspective, what we need to process the waste is different. And from that perspective, pyrolysis requires much more energy. And also that's all the greenhouse gases emission of pyrolysis in comparison to chemical depolymerization are higher. And as well as there is a lot of question mark, and it's also why we are also always saying mechanical recycling from a precautionary approach. That's the fate of the pollutants, air pollutions, there is a lot of not knowledge on that one. It's kind of black box from our perspective. We don't have so much data. So if you have some, please share them. There's also one point that we need as well from that perspective. And I mean, I'm speaking about different type of technology, but it's also why we're always also having this kind of ranking from that perspective as well.
Sure. Okay, so we're drifting into life cycle assessment territory here. So I'm just trying to do a high level. I mean, the challenge is a fair one, without a doubt. And I think, you're not going to get chemical change without putting some energy in for some types of polymeric materials. So that's the first thing. But I guess in terms of the scale of what you're looking at, I think the first thing I would say is that we've looked at, the University of Warwick has looked at advanced mechanical recycling. So we're talking closed loop, HDPE milk cartons. And it was surprisingly high because of the additional processing steps that you have to put in. So, and again, it depends what the output is. If you're looking food grade materials, obviously what you're looking for as well, then you need to have to put something in to deodorize, depollute, and so on. And there are issues around that technology set. So it's not, the gap isn't as big as people might make out, it would seem, from some of the empirical data we've seen. Going back to, there are two key benefits, I would say, for doing advanced chemical recycling. First of all is that avoidance of burning. So we're taking material away from energy from waste, and we're saving net, in our process, close on 2 tons of CO2 per ton of process. But that's the avoided part, but the counterfactual case. The other part then is, how does that then compare with the fossil system? So, Caroline, you talked about we're still extracting. So if this stuff went to landfill, you're still pulling material out of the ground. So what our products are, in theory, competing with is that fossil system. So the question is, are we better or worse than that fossil system? If we are sustaining the consumption of plastic or chemicals going into plastic, and is it 95% of all products now have plastic in to some extent? So, it's embedded in society. So my point here is that
95% of people, I sometimes think.
So we need to find technologies that are out competing the fossil system as well as avoiding that. So we're taking the worst of plastics and then reprocessing that back into valuable hydrocarbons with the high yield, low waste, effectively enough energy to do the change without being excessive. And we know that we can outperform the fossil system by some margin. And we have an ambition to be like 25% of the fossil system and help decarbonise. So for me, it's about, we have to look at we haven't had the carbon conversation so much, and I think carbon is at the heart of a lot of this. We want to circular materials at a lower carbon. That's why we think chemical recycling is additive, because it's slotting into the existing system. We're dealing with problems that have been long-standing within the waste and energy systems for a long, long time, and we are then delivering more recyclate back into the circular economy. And that's what we're trying to achieve with what we're doing.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I want to shift the conversation in a slightly different direction and just pick up on a point that Lauriane made at the start of the discussion and come back to you on it, Carolina, which is the point about reduction as well as recycling. What part of the conversation, and also a question to you, Caroline, and perhaps first to you, Caroline, which is as a sort of user of plastics, what part of the conversation is about using less or shifting away from the harder to recycle materials? So how does that fit into your thinking?
Yeah, so I think there are several things there. Like first, and it goes back to the waste hierarchy that you were mentioning. So first, reduce where you can. I think that's something that we're all trying to do as well from a cost perspective, and because we know it's the right thing to do. So we have, and here I can't speak about all the FBI companies, but I'm sure there are projects equal to the one we have in Mars. But we are, whenever it's not needed, taking apart some pieces of packaging, and it's across all materials. It's not specific to plastic in itself. Then comes the question, because you were asking it, alternatives to plastic. Yeah. Well, the reality, it's not that easy. There is a good reason why our packaging were in plastic in the first place. Yeah. So having the exact same shelf life, the exact same protection of the product is extremely difficult when you move away from this. Or you would lose some of the functionalities that you had. So then it's it can be a discussion sometimes with consumers, but the acceptance is not always there. And I think, it's a reality as well. There is a reason why we have this packaging. Now, one point that you're mentioning though, so let's assume part of our packaging could be transition. And actually, we are trying things, you know, saying, okay, like, can paper work? Well, even in paper, in food contact, you need like some coating. Yep. You can't get like fully, full paper. Otherwise, sure, like your bar will melt, or like, or it will smell pet food all across a supermarket. Like, we need to be honest about this. But as well, what we can do with the plastic that we absolutely need is redesign it. And the question of design came in the conversation, the question of the yield, the quality. We need the quality input for the waste streams, whichever waste stream we're speaking of. Yeah. And this, we're super conscious of this as brands. And so we are investing already, not waiting for the packaging and packaging waste regulation, into redesigning our packaging to make them fit for infrastructure. Now, the big question mark is what will be the design for recycling criteria, which will come by legislation. Yep. That's creating a lot of unknown, and we need this legal certainty because there are a lot of investments to be made behind. But equally, like, we're very conscious of this, and we're taking these steps already to address this problem.
Thanks very much, Carolina. Did you want to comment on this point?
No, I think you summarized quite well. You know, in the waste hierarchy, reduction is enabled by materials innovation, has been enabled. We have been working in the industry for more than 30 years now to produce higher performance plastics. I'm talking about plastics now, to enable the reduction of the use of the material performing equally. And these many examples, right? In bottles, and we have Gloria here from PepsiCo, we have tremendous success of the decrease in the thickness until the limit. In collation, screen films more than 25% in the past 15 years. Stretch films up to 50% in tertiary pallet packaging in the past 20 years. Liquid carton boards, sealing layer 20% more in the past 20 years. Many examples enabled by materials innovation. And then you say reuse, right? I think you mentioned as well. I mean, of course, reuse is for us, I mean, we understand it needs to play a role. That's kind of our position, right? But it needs to be proven benefits in terms of CO2 versus single use, right? For flexibles, we play more on flexibles versus reuse. We don't really know how could really work. But we see some examples, for example, of refill systems in reuse or metallic bottles, right, with refillable flexibles. And if those refillable flexibles are designed for recyclability, as all packages they need to be as of 2030, and they should, then I think makes sense because those flexibles are 70% less versus a rigid bottle. Then you keep your rigid bottle at home and you can refill. You can even ship, order by Amazon. Just thinking, So those systems, I think they will play a role, especially in cosmetics. You ask my personal opinion on home and personal care. I see these to play a role. In food, I think it's more difficult, But I mean, so we agree. I mean, if reuse derivatives brings proven CO2 benefits versus single use by RCA, I think should be playing a role here.
Even in food, we do maybe because I didn't mention reuse. I know it's a topic which is interesting from your perspective. I mean, we do have pilots. But they raise questions in terms of hygiene, in terms of where do you wash eventually your reuse and stationary, and that creates like potentially more environmental constraint. And there is a consumer acceptance. That's a reality. That eventually there is
consumer preference, you would say, or
acceptance. Well, yes. Preference or acceptance. You can use both words because eventually what you would have as well, like certain products to start with, like will never be able to be in reuse. Probably, like I went actually to a bulk store the other day in Brussels, and I looked. I mean, certain categories of products you're like, okay, could work, but certain categories like chocolate biscuits, they're all broken or they melt, and then you've got like it's a food waste that you're generating. So sure. I think there are really key questions to be wondered, which are like environmental footprint from like the food waste standpoint, from the overall process, investment in infrastructures, and taking the consumer on board as well. Yeah.
Okay. And there's one part of the piece that Antonio raised that we haven't discussed in much detail, which I'd like to come to, which is collection and sorting. Obviously, collection and sorting is extremely variable across Europe. Caroline, if I could just ask you this, I mean, what is the reason why we have this extremely variable picture, and how do we begin to deal with it?
Well, it's a good question because as brand owners, we pay EPR fees. Yeah. So the extended producer responsibilities, and so actually something we're now asking for, and maybe it was in the past that we pay them a bit blindly and didn't necessarily have this discussion, but now we're definitely starting in saying if we pay for a specific material type, the money should be invested in the collection and sorting of that specific material type and not being divested to another material, because it's probably what has happened in the past. So really, as a point of collection, super important. So we believe that, especially now that with the PPWR, packaging will be designed for recycling, they should be collected to be recycled. That should be a bare minimum there. And the financing as the EPR are there to play that system. And sorting, definitely, again, coming back to the quality of the output that is needed, both for mechanical or chemical recovery or recycling, how we want to call it, will matter. So this as well, that will be as well the role of EPR.
Carolina, how do we drive change in this part of the system, in the collection and sorting system?
I think, also want to pass the word to Lauriane, because I know you're driving an initiative on that matter. For us, it's crucial that, enforcing the current legal targets that member states need to deliver on collection is crucial, first of all. Second, because humans, we are not perfect. Even if you're enforcing collection targets, not everybody will go to the yellow bin. Even if you have a yellow bin. In Madrid, I have a yellow bin every 200 meters. So the infrastructure is marvelous. And I do my job, but I see not everybody is so cautious, whatever it is, right? We are more and more, but not everybody is perfect. So I think, mandatory pre-sorting of recyclables, plastics packages before incineration will be needed, because then you're collecting those materials for making them available for recycling. And that's what we need to get more raw materials, alternative to fossil, into a new circular system for all of us to scale up all recycling technologies. So that's why, maybe passing the word to you, because I know you're working on that angle.
Yeah, also from that perspective, there's there is also what's really important when it comes to collection rate and collection system. It's also how this is built. So there is a lot of incentive also to, let's say, incentivize consumer to go in certain direction, but also what needs to be done at the member state level, and also what we are asking for is really to have important separate collection system, and as well what is remain to be one of the most efficient system. In the end, is not to have bins everywhere in the street, because we just, let's say, drop our what we have in the hands in the bins, for example. But so really having also door-to-door collection. This is another system that needs to be improved, and that certain municipalities and countries have. For example, in Belgium, we have this door-to-door collection system, and also it appears that Belgium is quite highly ranking when it comes to the recycling rate as well. So there is a lot of piece has to come together, pay as you throw, door-to-door collection, separate collection. So it's a whole system that really needs to advance not one piece but everything together. So there is also this thinking that needs to be done and thought from an holistic approach, if I can say it in that way.
Okay, thank you, Lauriane. In the we've got a few more minutes. There will be some time for informal conversation afterwards, obviously, but I just want to come back to the audience for a few more points. And
I just wanted to. Can you hear me? Yeah.
We can.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just wanted to take a look at this a little bit more from a, call it operational, real world sort of perspective. So first of all, the waste generation is the sum total of consumption. Right. So it's not some behavior that follows a particular systematic pattern that is repeated, precisely over and over again. Christmas time, people have certain habits and they generate a certain waste. When it rains, more paper and everything sticks to plastics, all kinds of things. So you've got this environment that's completely variable, right? And I have to say, despite the best efforts to design for recycling, it's not the actual design that really matters. It's how that product is consumed that really matters. Because I could, for instance, just to, let's say, you've got Pepsi in the room, so you've got a nice little syrup pouch that you give to your fast food partner, and they have no more use for it because it's empty. So it could be pure PE, it could be rocket fuel for any recycler, but it will have syrup residue on the inside, and no mechanical recycler will touch it, and there'll be a lot of technologies in the chemical recycling space that will not touch it, but it has been designed to be perfectly recycled, but it cannot be. And so you have a lot of instances where the real world sort of catches up with you, and you have limitations. So I firmly believe, I'll go on the record here, that I believe in the waste hierarchy, and that anything that can be mechanically recycled should be mechanically recycled up to a point, because there's a point at which you reach whereby every additional percentage recycling costs twice as much as the one previous, and you just reach an economic limitation when it just doesn't become viable for anybody to do it. And there is a conscientious decision in the system that we have. So if you look at advanced countries like Belgium or Germany or so on, who have, all the infrastructure that other countries would dream of, yeah, where the waste guys say, that's it. I'm willing to pay a lot of money to go and incinerate it, because it will cost me even more money to do more with it if I could, but I can't, because what am I going to do? Manually have guys with clean the syrup out of these pouches and things like that. So there's a real world limitation as to what you can do. Whether you have incentives in place and so on, it just doesn't work anymore. And then this is where the argumentation is the waste hierarchy comes in. Sort of, people like us say, okay, so you finish and we begin, right? So now you give us this material. And we're actually soul brothers with the mechanical recyclers, because all the sorting, usually people think, oh, mechanical recycling, that's the sorting guys, and then the chemical guys, these are the the guys who then burn it or do something horrible with it. We actually sort. Most of what we do is we sort the material to bring it to what we want. So we remove glass, we remove metal, we remove dirt that attaches itself to the film because it has a very high surface area, so that we can actually process it. But mechanical guys would have to do the same.
Okay, I'd like to just take a couple more voices from the room, and then we'll come back to the panel. There's a lady with her hand raised in the black and white shirt, just behind you. Yep.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Jimena. I work at Dow here in Brussels as government affairs leader. I think that we have been learning so much today. For me, it was fantastic to hear all of you, so many experts in the room, different visions on how to do things, but not what needs to be done. I think a critical tool that needs to be front and center of this discussion is how policy can help. Mm-hmm. Public policy needs to be a critical enabler for all of these wonderful ideas to be successful and to achieve what they need to achieve. We have a lot of policy discussions in this town currently happening. I'm sure everyone is trying to achieve the same thing: decarbonization, thinking of circularity as a critical tool for decarbonization. Mm-hmm. We have discussions on packaging and packaging waste regulation, which was mentioned a few times. We have discussions on mandatory recycled content in packaging, which is something critical to enable all of these people in the room to keep working towards circularity and creating the right incentives for everyone to keep investing in Europe and betting in Europe. And I think it's really important that policymakers get the chance to interact with all these wonderful people here and see all the technologies and see all the innovation and see all the creativity that is going into how to make this world more sustainable. We're discussing mass balance in a brewery. This is how invested we are in trying to explain how critical this is. And if it's not the right tool, let's discuss. But I think that to have the opportunity to interact with policymakers, in many cases, they are very open to new ideas. I think it's critical so we can have really public policy that conducts to a more sustainable economy.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for your comment. Carolina, I just want to come back to you on a point that you raised very early on in the conversation. You talked about the need ultimately to defossilize, and you talked about that having quite a long time span. Could you just give us a sense of what the time span of that is? In terms of defossilizaation.
Okay, maybe also, closing because we are just closing, I will use 1 minute and we pass the word and everybody can do a closing. That would be, for me, would be the closing, as Jimena said. I think it's very important that we are all together in front, especially talking with policymakers to stimulate the framework that we need to go to the North Star. Yep. As an industry, our North Star should be utilizing, reducing as much as possible fossil use in chemicals and plastics in the future. I wouldn't want to say phasing out, because I think it's a big too much statement. of where we are today, which is almost 100% fossil. But the Reshaping Plastics report launched last year is talking that by 2050 it's possible still to reach net zero for the plastics economy in Europe if we are speeding up the actions in the next 5 years span. So now is the moment, and by then we will be utilizing 70% of non-fossil resources. Still, that's the vision, North Star, net zero 2050, 70% of resources used by plastics and chemicals are not coming from fossil sources. That's the future. I think, we have, as we know, a very time frame window, to make things change. And that's why, I also want to reiterate what Jimena said, as much as possible, reach to your policymakers' contacts, not only in Brussels, we need the countries, because they have a voice in this process. So in the different countries, the Netherlands, Spain, or you name it, Germany, to make sure that they listen to our voice to make things good. That's from my side.
Carolina. And Caroline and Lauriane, the same sort of final question to you, which is, what do you think the next conversation needs to be? What do you want to go out of this room, and what do you want the people in this room to do from here?
Well, I think we heard, despite the differences, we heard a lot of common points. So I can only echo what Carolina said and maybe be more specific on certain points, which are, collection, sorting. We've all mentioned this, we all agree on this. The necessity to have complementarity between different types of technologies, the need for the waste hierarchy to be respected, and also even, and maybe Lauriane, you can contradict me if I'm wrong, but it seems mass balance is something we all recognize could be helpful as well, to have one level playing field to guide the consumers whenever there are claims being made. So I think this is possibly a common message we can live with in the middle of our differences, but please go ahead.
I agree, and that also perhaps a point that we didn't mention, and is also quite important to me as well, at least, is that, I come from Zero Waste Europe, is waste as a symptom of our economy, of our overproduction, over-consumption of resources. So I think one point that we need also to be clear is that we are in Europe over-consuming, and we need to degrowth some production and also moving more towards sufficiency. And I think this is also something that we will hear more and more in the years to come, because we're living in a finite world where resources are spread everywhere. We are also need to think about how we are behaving, and I think this is also, something that, sufficiency in our consumption pattern is also quite important from that perspective, I would say as well. So.
Okay, so in the space of 60 minutes, we've moved through economics, chemistry, and finally to philosophy, the question of what is enough. I think we might need to carry on with philosophy over a beer. Thank you very much to our hosts, the Brussels Beer Project. Thank you to Carolina, Caroline, and Lauriane, our panel. Thank you very much.